We'll call the Marathon County Board of Supervisors to order, please. We do have a quorum. We have 11 people attending virtually. So we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing. Following the Pledge of Allegiance will be a silent moment of reflection. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We will have the reading of the notice, please.
An educational meeting of the Marathon County Board of Supervisors will be held at the Marathon County Courthouse Assembly Room, 500 Forest Street in the city of Wausau at 7 p.m. on May 11th, 2023. The agenda was duly signed and posted.
Thank you. And I would like to request everyone, please silence your cell phones or put them on vibrate as to not be an interruption to the meeting. And I thank you for your compliance. And we'll proceed to roll call. I'd ask everyone to please sign in. And then All right, thank you. And I would like to welcome all of the visitors that we have with us this evening, and also including in that is the viewing audience. So thank you for your interest in county government. Moving on to item number 7, and that is public comment. We did not have anybody approach myself nor the clerk, and so we'll move on to item number 8, educational presentation and/or reports. Item 8A, a follow-up on the budget summit, addressing the questions received from supervisors. So we will continue with those, and I think we're starting with Supervisor Robinson.
Thank you. We're at question number 6. Continuing, could the county change fiscal years to match the state of Wisconsin? No, we can't, because it's statutorily defined, and we have funding from a number of sources, including the federal government. We will always be chasing somebody else's fiscal year. The state operates on a July 1 through June 30th. The feds work on an October 1 through September 30th, but most importantly, under the state statute, section 59.60, parent 3, it sets our fiscal year as a calendar year. And then a question relative to cost to continue. It would help me to see the numbers in reference to a new budget. We provide, when you look at the budgets, there's always, I think we've done in the past year-to-year budgets and cost continue. The problem is the cost to continue is driven by a number of things, including compensation costs, increases in benefits, inflation, and new revenues. I think you would look to that. We're limited in our income to the net new construction and others, but when we develop our budget assumptions later this summer, those will do a lot to determine the cost to continue. And hopefully our budgeting system, when it gets fully implemented, will give us a better idea of where we are year to date relative to the budget to help us going forward. And please, Administrator Leonard, please fill in at any time. And again, inflation is one of those outside factors that's difficult for us to factor in. Do departments have a decision matrix for purchasing capital assets or funding capital projects? Lance?
Sure, I can take this one, and to I'll take you up on your offer to fill in on a couple of pieces. On the fiscal year piece, one caveat to what Supervisor Robinson indicated, you do have one choice to make with respect to your budgeting. You can be the second county in the state of Wisconsin, should you choose to do so, to go to a biennial budget. I believe Washington County is the only other county in the state of Wisconsin that does that. Every other county, like Marathon, is on an annual fiscal year, a calendar year. And then with respect to cost to continue, just to build on what Supervisor Robinson referenced, through your budget assumption process, you're going to largely define that. You're going to give administration and department heads guidance on what does the compensation increase look like? What are you looking for in terms of health insurance or health care benefit plan costs? And we will build those in. And as we've talked about before, because the delivery of government services is a people business, largely our costs are people. So those two things really do drive our cost to continue per se. As it relates to question number 8, do departments have a decision matrix, for purchasing capital assets or funding capital projects, for example, rolling stock, what is all considered? I'd say the number one thing that is driving our processes for capital projects or large capital purchases like rolling stock is your procurement code that the board has adopted. It recently made some changes to that, they hadn't been updated for a long period of time, but our procurement code largely drives how department heads go about procuring the various pieces of capital that they have. Large projects, just like small projects, are driven by what are the needs of the project. But your ordinance, if you look to Chapter 3, that will drive what that decision matrix looks like. For some projects, for example, if we're building the actual building, we're going to put that out for a request for bid. And that is governed by state statute, very strictly governed by state statute. A public work defines how that process works in terms of the timing of notice, the length of time it's published. Facilities works with Corporation Counsel to have a bid opening procedure. We follow that procedure and select the bid in accordance with state statute. There's a little bit more flexibility with respect to the request for proposal process under your procurement code, but first and foremost, your procurement code is based on the idea that we need to receive, department heads need to make sure that we are getting best value for Marathon County. There are some procurement codes, for example, that give preference to local businesses. Your procurement code does not. Your procurement code is best value for Marathon County government. So I think that takes us through to number 9, which I think this one is me as well.
What instructions, parameters does staff receive at budget time? Assume increase or decrease of X%, Lance?
Sure. And I think this is one area where our revised process that you adopted is going to help me give that guidance, but I'll tell you, historically, the guidance to departments was largely driven by the feedback we had from the board. My predecessor and I think, took very similar approaches. That historically, that guidance was we aimed to have a growth of a departmental budget less than 2% if possible. And certain departments, as we've talked about before, given any pressures of any given year, were better suited to do that or not. I will say in the last couple of years, the 2021 budget year, for example, my direction was different because the board, we went through a very rigorous process of a budget repair plan. We weren't sure what the revenues would look like for 2021. So the direction was to department heads, you need to cut your operations budget by such a level that you're effectively funding your compensation increases for staff within that budget. There was a flat budget target for all departments, and you can see that when you look to the 5-year, that many departments, there were some that couldn't hit it based on pressures that were within their departments. Some significantly exceeded our target, but that was the target I gave. Last year, my budget message was a bit longer. I gave targets in terms of what I expected from department-specific targets, but what I expected relative to revenues and expenses. I gave specific direction to seek out grant revenues for the programs we're already delivering, really try to be innovative and find new ways to offset levy increases, identify opportunities for user fees where we hadn't identified those before, and you've seen some user fee increases. And Jess is in the back, great example of doing that. And then internal service delivery options, where we were departments contracting for things that we could deliver to each other internally. And that was, again, one of the things that actually drove us to evaluate. Now, it didn't work out, but it drove us to evaluate utilizing North Central for the generation of our jail meals. On the expense side, we, again, I gave direction, really pushing for efficiency, striving to eliminate waste, utilizing our Ideas Academy program, evaluating alternative service delivery models. So again, the board picks the programs, staff are the how people. That was what led to the evaluation of the nurse home visiting program, and we made a model change, which you've heard about at the health department, to the nurse family partnership. And really looking, another one was staff reductions. We had a couple departments that did hold positions open. I really challenged department heads. Kim's office, for one, is doing that right now. They're funded for 4 positions. They're fully staffed for 3 right now. We also have a similar thing happening in Register of Deeds. Mike's department, Corporation Counsel, didn't fill a position during the last budget cycle. So those were all things I gave in terms of direction to department heads.
All right, expense categories. Can we get a breakdown of how each category is funded? I.e., all those, or are these funded through general operating budgets? I think we've started to provide that information with that 5-year breakdown in the comparisons. There were also some slides that were in the presentation, slides 26 in particular, that provides that breakdown of where the funding comes from on a holistic approach to the budget. But again, as we've been meeting with some of the committees, perhaps some of these questions have been answered. You've got departments that are 91% reliant on levy and others that are 34%, and some actually generate a profit, or some are break even. The airport, the solid waste, the Register of Deeds office actually generates more fees than it costs through property transfer fees and other things. So,
The only thing I'll add to that is we're going to work with Christie to kind of take this chart and add a table to it that has what departments are within general government, for example. Some of these are relatively straightforward. Social services, that's the social services department, but it also includes veterans. Public safety, of course, is, again, somewhat straightforward. But we'll put a table within this chart, and we'll get that out to you to show you which departments are underneath each of those expense categories. We just haven't been able to get that completed since our last meeting.
can we get a breakdown on what fees we control? Lance?
Yeah, certainly. So we're working with the department heads. We have a meeting coming up next week, Friday, to follow up from your budget discussions we've had to this point. And there are 2 things we're going to be talking about relative to fees. We heard from some of the standing committees about the idea of a fee philosophy, trying to identify as staff, as best we can recollect, what the fee philosophy was at their standing committee or program committee to set the fees. That's the first thing we're going to look at. And then I am going to ask them to take a look at that fee document and identify which fees are set by statute or, I guess, as opposed to those fees that you have control setting. So we'll update that document. That's one of the things, again, when you look at what programs or services you deliver, at what level, the last part, at what cost. That can wait a little bit longer in the budget, but just to let you know, we're working on that, and we'll have those conversations starting next week, Friday.
All right. Is it possible to list cost on the services provided document? Lance?
I apologize for those of you that have heard this answer before, but the cost for programs, I just want to clarify, that's something we've talked about at the committees. The cost for programs is something that's a bit of a struggle because that's not how we budget. You have seen the 600-plus page PDF document of the line item budgeting, and there's a really nice article in the Wisconsin Counties Association handbook that talks about the various types of budgeting, and we do line item budgeting. So when you try to roll up costs to the program level, that's reliant upon a number of analytical assumptions you'd make. And that was really the idea behind priority-based budgeting. So if that's a desire of the board moving forward, we just had this conversation briefly at executive today, that really will need to be identified as a priority to put staff time to that. But as it relates to costs to deliver the services as it relates to the fee document, I will likewise start to have that conversation with staff. It's not going to be very, I hope it's helpful, but it's not going to be very precise. So for example, if you have a permit fee through conservation planning and zoning, not every permit review, of course, is the same. Some are pretty straightforward and don't take additional investigation or work with the landowner, and some are quite involved. Of course, the permit cost for that doesn't change. But I will alert department heads to the desire of the standing committees to be able to have some discussion about that. So hopefully when you get to that point at your standing committee level, you can have a more in detail discussion relative to what does it cost for us to deliver services. It aligns well with that fee philosophy conversation.
What is the breakdown between property taxes and sales taxes? And there are actually three sources of local revenues. We have the property tax, which is 25% of the budget when you look at the $54.8 million that are generated through the levy, and then we have sales tax that has been increasing every year, and then we have the vehicle registration fee on top of that. Christie's working on a chart that she will be,
It's up there.
we are providing.
Yep. So you'll see the generally speaking, and there's three large buckets as Supervisor Robinson referenced that go into the taxes, but there are a number of smaller ones. Tax levy, of course, is the largest, about 3/4 of the various taxes that we take in. From your budget last year, you had about $58.5 million of anticipated property tax revenue. Sales tax is the second largest bucket. That's the approximately 21%. But your budget was $15.5 million, and you've come in a little bit higher than that in 2022. And then when you look at the vehicle registration fee, that's that about 4%. You budget just shy of $3 million for the vehicle registration fee.
All right. Unassigned fund balance, rollover questions, is the monthly 8 1/3% set in board policy? And yes, it is.
Yeah, and I'll send these two resolutions for, really it's a couple of these right in a row that I'll send resolutions for you so that you have them. But the rollover 8 1/3% is a board policy. It was adopted by Resolution R-139-88, so 1988. You had an amendment to that policy slightly for Highway Department, and I believe that was done in 1996. We'll send that resolution as well. Is the rollover a policy or an established practice? Certainly, it's a policy, and it has been our ongoing practice. In line with that, I can show you within your annual budget, it's been mentioned, quite honestly, as far back as I could find, a reference to the adoption in 2004. So this is your 2023 budget that the board adopted. On page 51 of 141 of that budget book, it references in 2004, the county board formally adopting the CIP funding policy that states that undesignated funds remaining in the budget after the working capital formula, which I referenced before in R139-88, after that capital formula is completed, are transferred in the year following the audit to the capital improvement program. So that's been communicated annually through the budget message. And in fact, your 2023 budget message, this is probably the most abbreviated form it's been communicated in. If you go to the Finance Department page of our website, you can find all of our annual budgets going back a number of years, and you'll see a bit more elaborate discussion defining what is defining what is capital, and discussing the 5-year capital improvement program and history of funding. Then the last part of that series of questions relative to rollover: can capital rollover funds be used to pay down debt or transferred to operating? The answer to each of those questions is yes. However, you'd need to change your policy. And in fact, this is something that HR Finance, it was discussed just this week. I've been soliciting some input from other administrators to see how they handle their capital rollover. I wouldn't say we're unique at all in how we utilize it, but there are some nuances. And I think, as we'll talk about later, when you start to look at one of the questions relates to the need to service debt, the anticipated need to service debt, what could you do a little bit differently? So you certainly could develop a policy, modify your policy to allow those rollover funds to be used directly to service debt or to be transferred to operating. But as I referenced before, your current policy doesn't permit that.
All right, we'll move on to borrowing, debt-related questions. Is it fair to say that our debt service will go haywire and limit our capital projects if NCHC does not repay their debt? Lance?
This, again, going back to the last question, I'll start with kind of what would be the impact if North Central can't service the debt on your ability to do capital projects? And the short answer to that is it really doesn't have any impact unless you want it to have impact. Your ability under the state levy law is such that you can, if you need to borrow to do capital projects, you're free to borrow to do capital projects. It's outside of the levy limits, as we've talked about. The same is true for debt service. Debt service, like capital borrowing, is above the levy limit. Now, certainly, I understand really the inference of the question is, wouldn't that make it hard? Because we haven't done that. We haven't borrowed extensively for capital projects, just as a general rule. And it would have some impact, which goes back to my last point about, which was made at HR Finance. You do have the luxury of having a significant amount of ARPA funds currently available. And the discussion that was started at HR Finance is, you'll see it today in the budget priority resolution that HR Finance brought forward. The idea, perhaps the strategy being, utilize Rescue Plan Act funds to directly fund your capital projects for 2024 through your budget, modify your rollover policy and your working capital policy essentially to mitigate the potential impact should North Central not be able to service the full amount of the debt come 2028. Because if you look to the slides that we sent out previously, specifically slide 11, you'll see that next year North Central is slated under our negotiated agreement to service $2 million of their overall debt service. That is not the full amount. It then increases each successive year by $500,000. The full amount of debt service really doesn't come into play until 2028, when you see it's $4.13 million. So the strategy, at least initially in its formative stages being discussed at HR Finance and Property, I would characterize as one of modifying your policies such that you mitigate the potential impact on the debt levy rate should North Central not be able to service its debt.
All right, then we've been asked to please provide a bar chart of total Marathon County outstanding debt in dollars by year for the past 20 years. We don't have that. However, the financial reports and the audits that are generated each year contain information on the debt. We will be receiving last year's audit, hopefully later this month, presenting that at the Finance Committee and making it available to the board to look at. How do we plan to address the situation that the county has approximately $28,494 or 40% more debt, total of or 53,494 or 291 or 75% containing bug tussle guaranteed debt than the debt limit set by the county ordinance. State statutes set the limit for borrowing for local units of government at 5% of equalized value. We are nowhere near that. Our policy says that we should try to achieve 1/10 of that or 0.5%. That's a policy, and the policy goes on to say that the increased use of debt shall not negatively affect the county's credit union if the higher debt capacity is used by the board. The board will give consideration to holding sufficient reserves in the general fund to cover at least 1 year's debt service requirement. We do cover the debt service, but the policy is advisory, and this board, when we adopt budgets or adopt resolutions doing borrowing, have the ability to set those limits above that 0.5%. And we are nowhere near our statutory. We're not even at the 1% of that 5%. We're below that. Anything you'd like to add?
No, I think there's a later question where I can elaborate.
By my calculations, moving the debt service from operating levy to debt levy, see page 13, would cause a total 2024 budget or property tax levy to increase by around 8.8% relative to 2023. And there are a series of questions of whether we agree with that. And I think that one of the discussions we had last year was how do we keep the levy, the overall levy, in line, including debt. There was a decision to use both operating funds, allocating a portion of the sales tax and part of our reserves. I think we're going to be talking about that later in the meeting relative to budget priorities as we move forward. But I think that the act of putting together a budget is a balancing act. And obviously, one of the final balancing factors is what's the total levy impact, and we will be aware of that as we go through the budget, but we'll have a better understanding. We are looking at use of ARPA funds, both for capital costs and in the context of lost revenues that could help avoid that. We cannot use the ARPA funds for debt reduction. That's one of the requirements of ARPA, so we're limited, but we may be able to, infill with budgets, capital budget to free up reserves for that debt levy. Anything you'd like to add, Lance?
No, I think the next question builds on it. Again, it's related to debt. How does our GO, general obligation debt, in 2023 compare to other counties and to our 2020 general obligation debt? So the general obligation debt, that was one of the new things we added to the budget book just last year. So you'll see that, I believe it's on page 19 of the budget book, and it shows that increase that I talked about before, your debt service obligation really increases up until about 2028, and then you start to see some decreases. When you add in the best document to show the impact of North Central's debt obligation and their corresponding obligation to service that debt is really the document that we shared last time, slide 11 of that handout, where again you see North Central Healthcare's debt obligation under our negotiated agreement increase through 2028, and then it is servicing that full amount of debt through the termination period of that debt obligation. Again, your term of that debt service was 20 years. So if you look to the end of this table here, you'll see that essentially what North Central Healthcare and Marathon County did, we refinanced their debt. You'll see that they continue to service debt through 2045. However, The debt obligation under the debt issue actually would have ended in 2042. So Marathon County, you'll see the net debt service column. In 2042, Marathon County has a debt service obligation of just shy of $1.7 million. However, North Central Healthcare then in the following year is paying Marathon County $4.039 million. And as of right now, Marathon County would not have any debt obligation. You don't have any outstanding debt that would be owed at that time. That, of course, could change should you undertake any major projects or any borrowing. But right now, you have $4 million of revenue coming in through that renegotiated agreement in 2043, 44, and just above $3 million in 2045. So the question that was asked really, I inferred from the question that the supervisor was trying to get some context is how do we compare with other counties? The Wisconsin Green Book that we referenced before, and all of you have a copy and it's available online, that doesn't have 2023 information yet. So the best way to get additional context that I was able to find, and if you don't find this persuasive, that I totally appreciate that. But I went out and I tried to gather data regarding the municipal debt held by cities and villages within Marathon County. And this chart has a couple of things, and I can email this to everyone as well. It compares municipalities, and again, for context, as Chair Robinson referenced, our debt per capita from 2020, and that's what year is referenced in this document. It's the most recent document we had through this site that I was able to find, and I pulled it off the Green Book as well. But our 2020 debt per capita for Marathon County government was $309. So this chart for municipality has not only debt per capita, those are the bars, the bar graph points, and then they also have the dots that are a percent of state debt limits, which Supervisor Robinson referenced before. What percent of borrowing do each of the municipalities have relative to their statutory debt limit of 5% of equalized value? So Marathon County is approximately less than 15% of that statutory debt limit. But you'll see from the various municipalities here, in terms of debt per capita, we have some municipalities, at least according to this data, which is somewhat dated, 2020, but their debt per capita, the bar graph, you can see ranges from about, looks to me like $3,800 per capita down to zero, but quite a number of them above the $1,000 of debt per capita. Conversely, when you look at the state debt limits, the dots, you'll see that a number of municipalities are just about between that 40 and 50% of their debt limit under Wisconsin state statute. Marathon County, of course, as I referenced before, is in that 15% range. No value judgment on this. I would just say this is, again, as something we talked about in our orientation kickoff. That is one of the primary reasons that municipalities are really asking for shared revenue reform, increased revenue reform from the state of Wisconsin through the budget process, because municipalities, including counties, have become more reliant upon borrowing to increase their ability to access revenue to perform necessary public works and maintenance. So that was information I tried to gather to provide that additional context. I couldn't, of course, find any 2023 information without, I guess, scouring a bunch of all the county's budgets and doing those calculations. This was the easy button for me.
All right, specific potential capital projects related questions, highway facility. If we invested, say, $8 to $10 million of ARPA funds by 2026 into maintaining and possibly upgrading our current highway facility on West Street, could we extend the useful life of the facility by 20 to 30 years? There's been planning that has been taking place since 2007 with the master plan that has identified the I think the limitations on that is in the desire to move away from that facility. Barrientos Design and Consulting did a study in 2020, and it looked at the West Street location, and the problems with it are the building design. It's elongated. The doors are narrow, which means they have to take the plows off every night when they go in, which creates some operational inconveniences and disrupts operation. There's an inadequate yard with tight conditions, and the site's just not large enough. And those have all led to the discussion on looking at a new facility elsewhere. But there are a number of factors that really drive that. It's an old facility. Its design doesn't facilitate good circulation and for maintenance and other activities. And again, those operational needs. Are there other county facilities, for instance, the Sheriff's Office Training and Resource Center, where we could invest ARPA funds to extend the life of the facility in order to avoid the use of debt to build new facilities? Yes, we can. And we're encouraging administration to look at the use of the ARPA funds for investments that would have a positive impact on the long-term basis on the county. But staff are specifically looking at the Sheriff's Office Training and Resource Center to look at what funds are needed to extend the life of the building versus build a new facility. So where it's appropriate, we're doing that. Where there are limitations on the design and operational inefficiencies, we're looking new.
And I apologize, there was one other question that came in after the second budget kickoff, and I took notes on it. It was really kind of a four-part question. The first was, what pay raise amounts have been approved for the last 5 years through the budget process? So last year, of course, you implemented a new pay and compensation plan. But in 2022, for context, the compensation amount increase was 3%. 2021 was 2.3%. And from 2016 through 2020, it was 2.0%. So going back a little bit more than 5 years, those are the numbers. The highest you've been is in terms of allocated percentage was 3%. But again, last year you had the pay plan implementation. The second question that was asked was, what percent are employees paying for our health insurance benefit? And wanted to pull up the budget document from last year, and this table is in every one of the budgets. So if you wanted to see context and see how it changed beyond what we put in the 2023 budget, you can do that by going to the Finance Department page and clicking on annual budgets. But our plan, our general employee contribution is 15% of the plan, and you see we have the single employee plus one and family plans across the top with the full premium, so you can calculate that out. If the employee participates in our health and wellness program, which is tailored to drive down medical costs, they get a reduction in their contribution. That it's then 10%. So if you have any questions, happy to elaborate on those. But going back to 2013, you can see how that share has changed. And if you go to previous budgets, you can go back I believe back to 2000 and maybe even before that. There was a request. The third question was really more of a request. Can we email the slide presentations? And I believe we've done that. And then the last question, which I think is very apropos, was the justification for the 5% inflationary number that was referenced. It seems optimistic. I think you could argue both sides of that, but I think that's largely true. It's you look at recent inflation has hovered as high as 9%. Currently, through this month, it's right at about 5%. Depending on what the Fed does, it could change. But as I think we all know, inflation is one of those things that certainly is going to impact our county budget. The inflationary number that was utilized in that debt table that was prepared by our financial advisor did have that 5% inflation on some things, and we've used that in other places, but it is absolutely an assumption.
Okay, with that, we have concluded all of the questions that were received, and we'll move on to item 8B, standing committee chairs or designees, reports. Any reports by standing committee chairs or designees? Okay, we will move on. Review and discussion of Tuesday meeting agenda items, ordinances. Item 9A1, Town of McMillan rezone. Jason Fluger with Larry Weigel. Ordinance 17-23. Any questions? Okay, moving on to item 9B, resolutions from the Public Safety Committee. Item 9B, 1A, a resolution in support of the 2023-2025 budget requests of the State Public Defender's Office, District Attorneys Association, Association of State Prosecutors, Department of Justice, and Director of State Courts. Resolution 27-23. Any discussion? Okay, we'll move on from item 9B2, Human Resources, Property and Finance Committee. Supervisor Shafinsky, you had a question?
I did, and I withdrew it when you moved on, but thank you for coming back, Chair Gibbs. I guess I'd like to understand the rationale behind that resolution of support. So can we have a little bit of explanation from the committee chair?
Supervisor Boots?
Hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
So the main thing is we actually met, correct me if I'm wrong, Administrator Leonard, we met back probably 4 or 5 months ago, or probably longer than that, with both the DA, the Public Defender's Office, representative for our area, and also the state public defender, head of the Public Defender's Office. And what's happening is you're seeing a big increase in wage differences between the public and private sectors. And basically what this is doing is getting us up to where we can actually get some public defenders and some district attorneys, because we're struggling. The district attorney's office, all of the judicial system, public-wide, our system is struggling to get applicants for the wages we're willing to pay.
One of the other things that happens if the public defender, we go out and find a public defender to take a case, the state rate that is paid is $75 per hour. And if we can't find anybody, the courts may order the county to pay and go out and find somebody. And we end up having to pay $100 an hour or higher. And so there's, in some cases, almost a disincentive for attorneys to take the public defender cases and wait till they are appointed by the courts to receive $100 an hour. So this, in the proposed budget, those two numbers would be identical. The state rate of public defenders would be paid $100 an hour, and the county ordered defenders would be paid $100 an hour. So that's part of the other rationale behind this. Hey, any other discussions?
If I can just add, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Just a little bit of additional background to your point. Within the packet, there's a criminal justice coalition memo that lays out their budget proposal. And just for additional background, for those of you who have had the good fortune to not really deeply understand our criminal justice system and the criminal justice system in the state of Wisconsin, it is really a state and county partnership. As Chair Gibbs referenced, on the defense side, for individuals who are indigent under the state standard for indigency, they are entitled to a public defender for representation. They don't have to pay. That's highly simplistic, but they don't have to pay the full cost of a lawyer. They don't have any real significant barrier upfront to having representation. For individuals that are not quite to that state definition level of indigency, as Chair Gibbs referenced, there's a second level. And those are called dean appointments. If you are indigent as determined by a local circuit court judge, you don't have enough funds or assets to pay for your own representation, to which you are legally entitled, you can qualify for a dean appointment. The difference is you are obligated under a dean appointment. The county essentially prepays that lawyer, and it's lawyers that have signed up under a list to accept a repayment fee of $100 an hour. That's less than the true cost of legal representation, if you were looking for context. We actually, it might surprise you, but we have some criminal defense lawyers that, based on the nature of the case and some occasions, are charging $500 an hour for certain types of representation. But certainly $100 is below the cost really to do that business. But they get on the list. The county prepays those fronts that amount of money for that lawyer to take the case. The defendant, the individual being represented, signs a document saying, I'll pay that back. As you may imagine, our recovery rate on those is somewhat less than 100%. And certainly you have cash flow issues. So we do budget for those appointments. You probably have seen the news stories. There's just a shortage of defense attorneys across the state of Wisconsin, particularly for those two categories I talked about before. I didn't talk about the third category, which is people have enough funds to get their own legal counsel. That's a whole nother population. We're just talking about those other two. But there's a shortage across the entire state for all of those. Particularly that shortage is impacting northern Wisconsin. There was just an article I just read from the State Bar of Wisconsin, I believe it was yesterday, talking about, it was a number of years ago, this attorney was reminiscing, and reminiscing is always, I always question the fact, but he said when he initially started practicing law in Minocqua, there were 70 lawyers in that area. Today, he said there were 6, and 3 of them were 70 years old. So, I mean, it painted a picture of you just really don't have a lot of lawyers in northern Wisconsin and willing to take those cases. And I can speak from my own experience, it's somewhat removed, but the number of local lawyers that take criminal cases, and I think Mike could say the same thing on in the criminal context and the child protection context, it's just decreased. So you have that environment, and this coalition is made up, as referenced in the resolution. It's the public defender's office, it's the state prosecutors, which again, when I talk about state and county partnership, I already talked about the state and county partnership on the defense side. On the prosecution side, similar story. The state funds our district attorney's office attorneys. The county is obligated to provide office space and office staff to support their operations. The starting rate for public defenders that are hired that are employees of the state of Wisconsin and prosecutors that is hired by the state of Wisconsin is $27 an hour, Mike? I think that's right. $27.24 an hour. The private market, may not surprise you, is significantly higher than that. And you have people coming out of law school with debt above $100,000. The market, we are severely depressed relative to other counties, other states. So all of these coalition members, the prosecutors, defense attorneys, the Department of Justice, director of state courts, so judges, they come together and they talk about what need to be the priorities in terms of the requests. This resolution that came from Wisconsin Counties Association, Resolution 27-23, is really the embodiment of all those requests.
Supervisor Boots, can I add to that? Oh, I'm sorry, Chris. I see Supervisor Dickinson is in there, but after him, I guess.
Supervisor Dickinson,
Is
please.
it,
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So I just want to clarify, this is a resolution in support of funding, is that correct?
it's not a, it's a recommendation. Marathon County supports the state looking at funding, correct?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Supervisor
And then
Bush.
to add to what, and then to add to what Supervisor Leonard said, so this was a 7-0 vote at Public Safety, and Lance went pretty in detail, but yeah, we went, the district attorney, we had public defender, they gave us a pretty good presentation on these things, and I guess moving forward, these were done at the standing committee level, and I would appreciate if people would look back and read through them or watch those if they'd like to get more information.
Okay, any other discussion? Okay, we will move on to item 9B2, Human Resources, Finance and Property Committee. Item 9B2A, resolution establishing the 2024 budget priority guidelines. Resolution 28-23. Supervisor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. The Finance Committee, HR Finance Committee met yesterday to talk about what the priorities should be for next year, and is developed a proposal to you. Again, we are following a process that St. Croix County embarked upon, and we're not original, but we're trying to put our twist to it. But the budget priorities are overarching goals that we'd like to see administration capture in the development of the budget, and the recommendations are in terms of capital reserves or structural deficit. We would like the proposed budget not to utilize capital reserves to fund operating expense or debt services, and consider the use of the remaining ARPA dollars for those capital needs. The thought is that we can't sustain a situation where we draw down our reserves that has potential to impact our bond rating going forward. We should not be drawing it down on operating costs, because those are one-time dollars to deal with recurring expenses. The second area was in employee compensation. The proposed budget looks at a 3% increase based on pay-for-performance concept. We have just invested a significant amount of time in money to try to bring our wages in line to others, so that we can avoid the situation where at one time we had a 17% vacancy rate. And we think, based on the recommendations of administration, that 3% increase should keep us in good standing as we try to recruit and retain talent. In the health insurance area, we wanted to maintain the quality of the healthcare insurance while we evaluate the delivery vehicle and look for cost savings. There are efforts underway within the administration to work with a consultant to both look at the design and the delivery of the plan, and looking at what some of our peers and other business communities are doing. In terms of new positions, the recommendation is that there be no new positions unless they are funded through non-levy resources, such as grants or fees, but that there's not the ability within the levy limits and the budget to absorb new positions. In terms of operating expenses, the proposed budget should strive to pursue efficiencies consistent with our strategic plan to deliver services and reduce cost. And again, keep in mind that the levy limits are limited by net new construction, which is a significantly limiting factor. We have other sources, which we'll be addressing as part of the budget assumptions later in the summer. We don't know where shared revenues will come in and other things, but these are sort of the directives that we think administration should look to in terms of the design of the 2024 budget.
I'll open it up for questions. Any questions? Discussion? Supervisor Shavinsky.
Thank you. I'd like to address point number 3, the health insurance relative to the proposed budget, in light of the administrator's very good information relative to cost sharing percentage. And if I understood correctly, we're somewhere between 10 to 15% depending on employee behaviors. You know, if you're healthy, you get a discount. If you're maybe not as healthy in your behaviors, you're a little bit higher. But we have a cost sharing of 10 to 15%, correct?
Correct. The employee share is either 10 or 15% of the overall premium. I wouldn't say it's based on your health behavior. It's whether or not you're in the wellness program and compliant with it.
That's what what that is
Correct.
for.
Yeah.
You know, been there, done that, been part of it. I guess what I would like to share, and I think everyone who's in private industry understands that commonly you're looking at a 75-25 balance. In private industry, I am not aware of anybody in private industry that is not paying at least a 25% share of their health insurance. And I think that is something that we need to look at as a county. Clearly, that's not something that's going to happen overnight, making a 10 or 15% jump. But I think it's something that, to be good stewards for the taxpayer, we need to look at that. Thank you.
Okay, other discussion? Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question is, we have this resolution that has these stated priorities. The executive committee today did not discuss what the stated priorities would be. How does this kind of jive with what we're going to be doing in a week and a half? I don't quite understand how we're going to select what the budget priorities are when the standing committees have not decided, the executive committee has not decided, but the full board is supposed to decide. Can someone explain that to me? Thank you.
Supervisor Robinson.
I think this is part of the overall process of putting together a budget. What these reflect is sort of those guiding principles that will drive the formation of the budget when the administrator goes out. The discussions on the individual programs in terms of the level of the services to be provided, the level of services and the rates and the fees continues to be a discussion that will be ongoing right up until the adoption of the budget. But what we're trying to do, again, is to give direction on how do we reuse reserves, what's the target for employee compensation. Those all get factored into the discussions, and we'll be able to then begin to look at what the impacts of those are on our ability to provide services.
Administrator Leonard, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So if I could as a follow.
Just a second, Supervisor, I've recognized the administrator would like to address your question also, please.
I'm sorry, Supervisor Dickinson. I think your question is well put. I'd say the same thing as Supervisor Robinson, but I'll premise it by saying I'm only basing this on what I've seen from watching a number of how St. Croix County's meetings and how they use it. I would say that the budget priorities that are in this resolution are those kind of overarching things that are going to impact the budget across all of the departments. So capital or utilization of capital reserves isn't specific to a program or a service. Similarly, employee compensation. Individual departments don't have control over their personnel budgets in the sense that they don't get to pick whether or not the overall compensation increase in their department is the 2.3%, a 2%, or a 3%. That's a determination by the board. We load that information into their budget programs, and it's something they can't modify, similar to health insurance. Also, the new position piece gives me the guidance to sit down with department heads and say, look, we're not doing new positions irrespective of a program or a service, absent it meeting the qualifier that HR Finance put on, that it would be fully funded through non-levy resources. So I hope that answers your question. I apologize for effectively cutting you off there.
Supervisor Dickinson, please go ahead now. Thank you.
Thank you. So when you talk about overarching priorities, someone or maybe the board's overarching priority is to not increase costs. Maybe it is to reduce costs. These 5 items are fine. I don't argue against them. But there could be other greater visionary board policy kinds of items to be included as a budget priority. And the only point that I'm really making here is that I don't believe that the standing committees ever spoke at length about these overarching priorities. And that's my concern, that we would be voting as a board in a week and a half on this resolution without really having that discussion. Thank you.
Okay, Supervisor Wilhelm.
Thank you, Chairman. With the proposed budget here, number 1, now it says not using capital reserves while using remaining ARPA funds for capital needs. Is that what we did last year with the healthcare center? We took money out of reserves to pay the debt.
We took money out of reserves to pay part of the debt, to cover some of the debt service for North Central Healthcare.
So with this, you wouldn't be allowed to do that if we pass this resolution?
Correct. That is saying the priority is, it's not saying that you can't do that. It's saying that build the budget initially without it, because it's not sustainable. You're using one-time money. Again, once you spend it out of reserve, you don't have it a second year to pay that debt the next year. So if you paid debt last year with reserves, which we did, we don't have that reserve again this next year. In other words, the reserve went down by the amount that you used. And continuing that, using reserves to cover debt or operating, again, you're using one-time dollars to pay for ongoing expenses. And that's not sustainable. And that's what the HR Finance Committee moved forward.
So with going to North Central Healthcare, is that something that we're going to be paying? This is going to be a continuing effect? Is that why this is put in place?
Supervisor Robinson?
Can you bring up that chart again? I think that would help explain it. But I think the goal, when the North Central Healthcare improvements were approved, it was based or predicated upon an assumption that the improvements would generate operational efficiencies and additional revenue sources necessary to sustain or to pay off the debt. The pandemic hit and impacted the delivery. There are worker shortages and other things that impacted it, so it has delayed the ability of North Central to pay for it. As a result, because we have guaranteed that debt, we've had to step in. The hope is that over the upcoming years is that we will begin to see some of those proposed efficiencies materialize, some of those revenue streams developed, and North Central will absorb that debt. But we will need to build the cost of that debt into our budget somehow by using existing revenue streams, whether it's earmarking portions of the sales tax or other things to that to avoid drawing down our reserves.
Okay, because my fear is if we raise a tax levy for North Central Healthcare, when we are caught up, that money is just going to disappear into the system, and the taxpayer, it's going to end up falling back with the taxpayers. They're never going to see the benefits of it later on.
So remember that there are, within the levy limits, you have levy limits on your operating budget. So if you have debt service that you're paying for, that's above your levy limit, by virtue of the county board with a 3/4 vote, proving that you have the ability to exceed that amount. Once you pay off that debt, that capacity to levy that amount above the line, if you will, goes away. So we can't take that debt service payment and roll it into operating funds. In this case, we're proposing to try to fund that debt not up above the line, but rather within the existing county budget. I don't know if that helps.
I guess to accentuate just a little bit, so once the debt pays off, once the debt is paid off, and on that illustration was 2043, NCHC's debt is paid off. There is no ability, if any portion of that debt were on the tax levy, that immediately has to fall off the very next year. So there is no then what NCHC continues to pay comes back into reserve into the county. Supervisor Shavinsky.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. So looking at this from a more of a 10,000-foot guideline, I read these priorities and I see basically everything's baked in as a percentage increase. How do we go about increasing the amount of money that we're going to spend? And what I don't see from an observation standpoint is I don't see any priority placed on limitations. And I know that we have the limitation relative to the net new construction. That's by statute. But the bias of this resolution seems to be towards how much are we going to increase the budget, and there's nothing in this resolution that says how much quantitatively, how are we going to limit increasing that budget, particularly in a time of high inflation on our residents. So we look at this, and it's a two-edged sword. I get that, because that high inflation is also impacting our employees. They, of course, would like a larger compensation increase, but we have all of our taxpayers within the county who are struggling as well, and more of them are living paycheck to paycheck than were 5 years ago. So I don't see any guideline here for limitation of growth.
Supervisor Robinson?
I would direct your attention to number 5, operating expenses, proposed budget process to strive to pursue efficiencies in service delivery and to reduce costs. I think that is there, but ultimately we have asked all the committees to look at the issue of what services do we provide, what level of services should those be at, and where are the fees. So there are ample opportunities for members to come forth with ideas, suggestions, and proposals on how we can do just what you're asking for.
Thank you.
Supervisor Sandalski.
Yeah, I just had a question on number 3 there, the health insurance. Is there like a possibility like we could get, say, a couple different estimates like on our health insurance and look at different companies to kind of compare them to see if we can get our best value for as far as the county, and then maybe have like the board look at that and see as far as get the best value for the taxpayers and for the as far as employees.
That's exactly what that portion is saying, is we're looking for, and we have historically gone out for bid by our insurance company. Internal, the office does go out and we have a separate entity that does that and requests bid proposals on our health insurance policy every year. So it is done every year, and it is reviewed, and the recommendation comes back based based on whatever the results are from that solicitation. Supervisor Dickinson. Supervisor Dickinson, you might be on mute.
Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Yeah, I apologize for that internet. The only thought I'll say at this point is after what Supervisor Robinson had stated, I don't think, and that discussion today in executive points out, I don't think that the standing committees actually commented on these budget priorities. I think there's other supervisors who were in that room at that time who discussed this. And really what you had in the standing committees was a lot of kind of looking around, not knowing exactly kind of where to go, what to say. So while I appreciate, kind of the overarching thought of this, I do not think that the standing committees have really focused on the priorities. And again, a week and a half, the full board is going to vote on this. And as written, I'm just not in support of it. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Okay, we will move on. Item number 9B2B has been pulled. It did not come out of HR Finance. We'll move on to item 9B3, Human Resources, Finance and Property Committee and Public Safety Committee. Item 9B3A, a resolution extending encumbrance of the ARPA funds for Regional Forensic Science Center project, amending the 2023 CIP budget, and authorizing expenditure for design services, Resolution 29-23. Any discussion? We also have with us the chair of the Regional Forensic Science Center, Vice Chair McEwen, along with Jessica, I'm sorry.
Our medical examiner.
Our medical examiner, Jessica Blahnik, please.
Here, okay. All right, good evening, everyone.
Can you hear me, Kurt?
Go ahead, Matt. I would first recognize the chair of the task force, and then Jessica, and then you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Vice Chair McEwen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone. Jessica Blahnik, our medical examiner, and I have a short presentation on the need for the Marathon County Forensic Science Center project. This all has to do with the resolution, which I will get to at the end. At the end of the presentation. But before I get started with I can't push on that, I can.
I'll do this.
Okay. Yeah. But before I get started with the presentation, I just want to explain why we're here tonight discussing the need for the morgue or the Forensic Science Center. In 2013, Jessica Blahnik, our medical examiner, approached the Public Safety Committee, which at that time I was the chair of the committee, and voiced her concerns about the difficulties she's been having trying to arrange autopsies. She felt that it was going to continue to get worse, which it has, and asked that we study possibly having our own morgue in Marathon County. So the morgue task force was created in 2017 and is still in existence. We're still plugging away, but hopefully this year we'll have some positive movement on it. The presentation is in your packet, and I'll ask Lance. He took the controls away from me, which is good. To move it forward.
Right there.
Oh,
I didn't take it.
oh, you took that away.
The computer.
Yeah, technology is great. So, anyways, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Jessica. She's going to start with the presentation, And then I'll follow up after she's done, and we will have questions, I'll answer questions at the end. So thank you.
All right, thank you everyone for having me here today and Chair McEwen to discuss the Regional Forensic Science Center. The objectives of our presentation is to discuss the need for pathology services, benefit of having a local pathology services, what has been completed, our final business plan results, and then the next steps. For just a little bit of background information on our office, coroners and medical examiners are tasked to do death investigation to determine the cause and manner of death in any sudden, unexpected, unexplained death, or any death that involves trauma. So that's any natural death, any homicide, suicide, accident, or deaths that are ruled undetermined. Our caseloads continue to grow, and also the complexity of the death investigations continue to grow, especially with the opiate epidemic and also the methamphetamine epidemic. One of the greatest tools we have as coroners and medical examiners is forensic autopsies that help us determine the cause and manner of death. A forensic autopsy is an external and an internal examination on that decedent. There's a lot of information that can be learned, such as any underlying medical conditions, any hereditary conditions that could impact other family members, any injury interpretation, such as a gunshot wound. It's very obvious this is a gunshot wound. However, the pathologist can look at that gunshot wound and tell you exactly where that perpetrator or that person who did it to themselves was standing, what position the gun was, what type of weapon it was, and the direction of it. So there's a lot of information that can be gleaned that can help determine if that was a suicide, an accident, or a homicide, and also different injury interpretation. It also helps with evidence identification and collection, so any type of bullets, any type of DNA. So one of the questions we get quite frequently is, what is the difference between a clinical pathologist and a forensic pathologist? A clinical pathologist is a doctor that specializes in pathology. So they look at tissue underneath the microscope and do diagnostic work on that. So if you ever had a biopsy or heard someone got diagnosed with a condition, a forensic or a clinical pathologist is a person who makes that diagnosis. Typically, they work in a hospital lab. They don't necessarily do autopsies. If they do, they're more of the basic medical cases, and generally they do not feel comfortable doing medical legal death investigations for coroners and medical examiners. A forensic pathologist has the same training as a clinical pathologist. However, they have additional specialized training in forensic pathology, where they learn more about injury identification, toxicology, postmortem changes, important aspects that are involved in a death investigation. They also are very passionate about doing autopsies compared to the clinical pathologist, and work for coroner and medical examiner offices. So why do we need a morgue in Marathon County? What are the issues coroners and medical examiners are facing? So locally, we have no clinical pathologist to perform autopsies for us for even medical cases. Associates in Pathology out of Wausau Aspirus Hospital no longer performs autopsies. They stopped performing years prior. Aspirus has no providers in-house that perform autopsies, so anytime they need to have an autopsy completed, that decedent is transported to Madison for that autopsy. Marshall Medical Center, throughout the whole system, does have a very great network of clinical pathologists. However, most clinical pathologists, like I stated, do not like doing autopsies, and they're slowly transitioning out of it. Right now, they only complete autopsies for inpatient deaths and do not do any cases for families or for coroner medical examiners. They are also looking for additional providers in autopsy services and are interested in utilizing our services. So there's only 6 places in Wisconsin that have forensic pathologists, and these are the counties that are listed. Waukesha and Brown County do not do referral cases for outside coroners and medical examiners. They only do their internal. And as you can see by the map, all the counties' providers are on the southern and eastern part of the state. Our office utilizes primarily UW-Madison for our autopsies and Fond du Lac as a secondary source. As you can see, by the mileage of round trip, it is a long day to travel to autopsy. We do have a lot of issues. For traveling to autopsy, we have to travel despite inclement weather and also getting minimal sleep for cases that happen overnight. I've had to travel in severe thunderstorms with tornado warnings. I've had to travel in really bad ice storms where we had semis in the ditch, because you cannot give up your spot, because if you give up your spot, you're going to be waiting additional days. That puts a family getting longer and longer from seeing their loved one. Scheduling an autopsy is also a struggle at times. Pathologists have very large increased caseloads, and with a growing number of autopsies from around the state and the clinical pathologists no longer wanting to perform them, more pressure is placed on the forensic pathologist. There's also the issue with delaying autopsy. So if it takes you 3-4 days, sometimes over a week to get into autopsy, that's delaying providing family answers as to what happened to their loved one. It also is difficult for law enforcement and district attorney's offices if it is a suspicious death where they need to hold the scene and not release anything. So you have additional law enforcement stationed at that house or that residence longer until that autopsy can be performed. And the sad part of it all is, despite the delays and everything, you still have postmortem changes that continue. So funeral homes have difficulty with embalming after, so families can have the services that they want to get their closure. And then the other thing is law enforcement typically comes to any criminal type autopsy with us. And it is difficult to coordinate having an officer at times where that takes that officer out of the office for that day, right as an investigation is. The first 40 hours are really critical. And if you're having that officer out of the office, they're not able to do the investigation work. Instead, they're traveling. So in 2021, we did an Ideas Academy to see how much unproductive work hours our office and law enforcement spend just traveling to autopsy. This doesn't even include the time at autopsy, because we will still have that. This is just the unproductive work that we do that has nothing to do and no benefit to the residents. Right now, at 75 autopsies, which is our average, we're spending 690 hours. That is over 17 40-hour work weeks. Someone from my office, a very specialized trained investigator, is out of the office driving for autopsy. It is definitely not a good use of productive time. As you can see, it is also for law enforcement, and the more autopsies you do, obviously it's more. The costing has not been fully updated, so there is a greater cost savings to the county by having something local. The other big issue that we have in the region is that there's no facility that can help in a mass fatality or a pandemic type situation. It was very difficult for the region when COVID hit, where a lot of the funeral homes, our office, everyone was overwhelmed and at a capacity. If we had a mass fatality situation, especially in the northern part of the state, there are no resources that can help. There are no places to store decedents. We are very fortunate at the start of COVID. We did get a cooler for our office. We can store up to 8 decedents. And at times we have 8 decedents in there. We've never been over capacity, but we've been at capacity multiple times. Any given day, we have anywhere between 1 to 4 decedents in our office and our cooler. Sometimes, obviously, it gets higher than that. The other issue we have within Marathon County is for tissue procurement. 58.6% of our residents are registered tissue donors or organ donors. And right now, there is no dedicated facility within Marathon County for that donation to take place. People are, the main tissue procurement organization actually transports our residents out of Marathon County to Columbia County to have that completed. If they were to do anything local, they're at the mercy of hospital operating rooms, or they're at the mercy of funeral homes to get that done. And most of them, like I said, our residents are being transported out of state, which then delays being released to the funeral home even more. There's also situations where the tissue donation is restricted or ruled out because of time frame rule outs. There's very strict guidelines of refrigeration time, when the person was last seen alive, and not having these resources right here in Marathon County, that eliminates a lot of people who could potentially be donors and really impact the community. The sad part is we always strive to try to honor decedents and families' wishes. That is our main priority in the work we do. But if we're unable to do it, families lose out on the opportunity of knowing their loved one was able to donate, and also lose out on a lot of the family grief and follow-up support that the procurement agencies provide. So the benefits to Marathon County if we were to move forward with the Regional Forensic Science Center. The most important people that we serve are the families. We work with people on the absolute worst day of their life when they have the sudden, unexpected death of a loved one. By having a local facility, we would definitely be able to improve the services we provide to those families. We would be able to better honor religious and cultural practices. We would have option for private pay autopsies if families wanted to confirm that a loved one had cancer, something that does not fall in the realm of a normal medical examiner autopsy. We would be able to provide those families those answers. We would have the option for organ extraction for research, which is something that a lot of our residents are registered to do, but currently there's no one in the area that are able to assist them. And then also we would be able to release the decedent to funeral homes faster. We also will plan to have an appropriate place to meet with families, a family grief room that has trauma-informed care standards to go over results, and have a nice place if families do want to see a loved one if there is a delay in getting that autopsy completed. And there's also improved qualifications for tissue donation, and also the enhanced autopsy services that we would be able to do more autopsies by having a local provider that gives families more clarity and a better chance for knowing different hereditary conditions. There's also numerous benefits to Marathon County in general. One of the main goals of our facility is to be a teaching institution. We have partnerships in place with the Medical College of Wisconsin, North Central Technical College, and I'm sure multiple universities around the area would be thrilled for the opportunity, where medical or law enforcement students would have the opportunity to observe an autopsy for educational purposes, and also we could work within the different established programs and enhance some of their training by having more real-world experience and be able to better explain some of the concepts that they're learning with more hands-on experience. And they're also looking at expanding some of the programs to meet the community needs. The other big thing with the education is a lot of the coroners and medical examiners and law enforcement in northern Wisconsin, and especially in the northern peninsula of Michigan, have no training opportunities in this area. Most of the training opportunities, as you guys are all aware of, are in the southern part of the states, the larger areas. Earlier this month, the Department of Justice held a training on infant death investigation. That was a free 4-hour training. They had 110 people sign up and attend, and they had a waiting list because not everyone could go to one training. So that is one thing that a lot of law enforcement and coroner medical examiners desperately need in this area to improve the services not only to their communities, but it goes further than that. We would have increased travel to Marathon County and increased jobs, increased trade calls for funeral homes. We would have forensic consultations to local departments. So if someone is a victim of some sort of physical crime, a gunshot wound, elder abuse, child abuse, and hospital staff need a expert opinion as to what the injury, how the injury occurred, the forensic pathologist would be able to assist with that. That is definitely a need that we've had law enforcement contact our office on multiple cases for consultation, but they would have the expertise of having an actual doctor instead of one of our staff explain things. And the thing that you guys would be most excited about, that eventually we would have a decreased dependence on the county tax levy. So our county tax levy should not go up, and as operations go and our numbers continue to grow, we should have a decreased amount of tax levy that our department would require. And kind of like I said, there's numerous benefits. So Marathon County, all the counties north of Marathon County have the same issues, but even worse than we do. So they would have to travel even farther for autopsy. They have the same struggles, the same problems. So that all of those struggles would be eliminated by having something closer. The forensic pathologist expertise would greatly help all those communities as well if anything is needed for there. And also having a local forensic pathologist for forensic testimony in criminal cases. The big thing that's huge that would help the state is to have additional forensic pathologists to help distribute the caseload. Right now, the current pathologists are burnt out, and there's risk of losing some of them to other states if the caseloads continue to grow and the responsibilities continue to stack up. Wisconsin desperately needs more pathology and resources, and this would really help offset some of the growing caseload, and also have partnerships with those offices to assist with some of the case backlog. So if a pathologist is on vacation, we could have another pathologist, another office being willing to help with cases, or if a large-scale event mass fatality situation came in, we could work together to help manage that so one office isn't overwhelmed. And all of this improves so many ways to the community by having these services and the teaching and just the overall care to families and to the decedent. The other big benefit is to have better mass fatality preparedness by being able to have space for decedents to go, have local autopsies, mutual aid agreements to help the smaller counties, and have both long and short-term body storage where we can maintain the chain of custody, which is crucial in any type of criminal investigation, and also be able to assist other counties with their complex cases.
Thank you, Jess. So I'm going to start off with where we are with the Regional Forensic Science Center project and the steps that have been taken since 2017 to move the Forensic Science Center forward. When the Forensic Science Center, or the Morgue Task Force, was created in 2017, we first started out by attempting to form some type of partnership with other counties, similar to like we have with North Central Healthcare Center and CCIT. It became very problematic to arrange this type of service due to the different amounts of autopsies that different counties perform. So it was decided by the Morgue Task Force to move forward with Marathon County owning and operating our morgue in Marathon County, but also allowing services to the other counties and the medical facilities at a cost. From there, we started to look at properties that were available at that time. And initially, the first idea was the old Aquatic Center at North Central Healthcare was considered. And with individuals that were doing designs, they highly recommended that we did not try to remodel an existing building because of all the different type of air handlers and other things that are needed for a forensic science center. And we also looked at properties that were owned by Aspirus in the old Liberty building, and the Marshfield Clinic. I think it was the old BMO Bank on the corner of 28th Avenue. However, those, again, were not recommended because of the type of remodeling that was needed. We are now looking at property that's on North Central Technical College campus, which was just recently being studied, and we are still trying to work on different, as far as who's going to maintain it and different things like that. The Morgue Task Force, the members on here, most of them are original from the 2017 task force. The two new ones are Kim Weber from McDevco and Dr. Jeannie Warden, the president of North Central Technical College. In 2018, the task force hired Wifley to do a CPA and consultant firm to do a feasibility study, which they did, and they determined with the information that we had at this time that this would be operational neutral. They developed a business plan, and which was completed in 2020. It was updated in 2022, and just recently a portion was updated in May of 2023. Why in Marathon County? Geographic location, number one, we are centrally located in Wisconsin. We also have a crime lab in Wausau, northern office. Other locations, Dane and Milwaukee County also have a crime lab in their region. We have a Department of Criminal Investigation, or DCI office in Wausau. Community resources, we have numerous colleges and universities, Medical College of Wisconsin, other locations, Green Bay and Milwaukee also do, North Central Technical College, UW Stevens Point at Wausau, and we have two major hospital systems, Marshfield Clinic and Aspirus Wausau Hospital. The population, we are the largest county in the region and have the largest medical examiner's office in the region with staff and resources to support the facility. Comparable counties, they studied several counties. The three that are red and highlighted, St. Louis County in Minnesota, and I like this one, I want to live there, Minnehaha County in South Dakota, and Fond du Lac County in Wisconsin, were the ones that were compared with the studies because they were similar to our population and demographics. Other Wisconsin counties with forensic pathologists, of course, is Dane County, Milwaukee County, and Waukesha. Data that was obtained from doing the comparisons was financial, staff structure, community partners, and advice. During the study, we also studied 35 counties, majority of them north of Marathon County, and 28 of the 35 counties were interested or expressed interest in using our services. Also, 6 of 8 Upper Michigan counties expressed interest, and just these Michigan counties were not included in the business plan, so it may be, we may have more autopsies that are not figured in this business plan. Marshfield and Aspirus are also interested in utilizing our services. Cash flow analysis. It's divided into 3 categories, low, mid, and high. Determine the number of autopsies between all these counties that were expressed interest were between 208 and 465. The staffing needs, salary, and benefits were analyzed, anywhere from 3 to 6 full-time employees and 4 part-time livery drivers. Revenue, autopsy, forensic, and medical, livery services, facilities using use fees, tissue procurement, and other services. The expenses that were considered were the salaries, supplies, equipment and maintenance fees, histology, and miscellaneous costs. This is the case flow analysis with the high, low, and with a high, medium, and low, with revenues, expenses, and cash flow. And the analysis is based on starting out high. The reason, and I questioned Justice why on the mid there was a cash flow of $700 when low was $8,500 and the other high was $149, and that is with the middle we would still require 2 pathologists, and we would not have the number of autopsies, so the cash flow would be reduced somewhat. So partnership discussions, we had discussions with Aspirus, with Marshfield Clinic, Medical College of Wisconsin, Versity, American Tissue Services, and North Central Technical College, which we are currently working with at this time for the land acquisition and other services with them. Marathon County Forensic Science Center Lab Center of Excellence. This is showing the location of North Central Technical College as to where the Forensic Science Center, if we're able to negotiate something with the tech on the land acquisition. Special needs assessment. Young Agnes Young architect firm completed a preliminary analysis in 2019. And then Somerville architect, who was involved in Brown County's Forensic Science Center, completed update and analysis in July of 2021, and analysis dated in 2023. And again, they encouraged new construction not to attempt to do any remodels on existing buildings, because of all the different renovations that would have to be done to fit that building. Facility costing. At this point, the size of the Forensic Science Center would be 16,632 square feet. And total cost at this time is $14,841,266. It's broken down. Construction is $11,176,704. However, that includes a 20% contingency. So this would be on the high end, which we would rather be prepared for that than have a shortfall. Furniture, equipment, and then land. That's the price so far that we have received from North Central Technical College, and then permit fees and surveys. The funding resources, of course, are the $2 million that this board authorized from ARPA funds to be allocated for the Forensic Science Center. The neighborhood investment grant we applied for, but we received no funding. State legislation budget, $10.6 million allocation being considered by local legislators, and congressionally directed spending of $2 million from Senator Baldwin's office from the federal government. Next steps, the county board projection approval, CIP resolution approval, and the ARPA funds resolution. This is the three things that are on the resolution. We're asking for the county board to approve extending the ARPA funds deadline from using this money from July 31st, 2023 to December 31st, 2023, just for the fact that we may not know the results of the budgets from the state and federal government by July 31st, and we'd hate to lose the funding because it's required by the resolution that we passed that it be used by then. The CIP request, we're asking to put the Forensic Science Center in the CIP budget this year. It is not in our 2023 CIP budget. And the ARPA funding resolution we had talked about that, getting that extended. And then what we're also asking is that we are allowed to utilize $178,095 to start the design process, which we would like to start in June, because they estimate a 5 to 6 month time period for the design. At that point, that would put us in November, December of this year. And if that design is not done, we may not be able to get the RFPs out for construction in January, February at the latest of 2024. And the longer you wait, the funding for the construction RFPs, it gets more expensive and more difficult to find companies to do that. The architectural design, like I said, that's the RFP. We want to start that in June of 2023. Construction RFPs no later than January 24th, or 2024, and that's estimated to take around 12 months to build. Funding scenarios. Upon completion of the RFP for professional services, schematics designs can begin and conclude by the end of 2023. This is ideal for the funding timeframe. I had talked about that. Wait until August, September, and add 5 months onto that for the design. That's going to push us into February and March of 2024. And the bidding process gets much more difficult and much more costly. Waiting until 2025, that's going to increase the costs based on annual inflation and markets. So it'd be the sooner we get this design and bids for the construction, the less it's going to cost. Pay now or later. Basically, I covered that about the getting the funds extended to the ARPA funds extended to 12/31/2024, and paying now to complete the first phase of the project. And that's basically a quick overview of about 5.5 years that this task force has been in existence. The Public Safety Committee and HR Finance and Property Committee approved the resolution that we're talking about this evening. And I would just like to thank Public Safety and HR Finance for moving this forward, and thank the board for the time. Are there any questions?
Before we get to questions, I had offered Supervisor Boots a comment period. So Supervisor Boots first.
Yeah, I'd just like to reiterate that this task force was reporting to public safety, but honestly, Jess and Craig have been instrumental, obviously, in 5.5 years of work doing this, and we thank them at the standing committee meeting. We thank them again. So basically, the ask is $178,000, hoping that the other agencies will kick in the rest. And us using $2 million of ARPA funds. And Craig I would like to also say, Craig was spot on as far as the bidding process, as far as timing. He's 100% right in the construction trade. We want to have this out by November, December, January, February. So we should get it out sooner than later. So he was spot on. I just want to say he does have the Public Safety Committee's support on this. Just reported to us on this Tuesday. So thank you, Craig. Thank you, Jess.
Thank you.
Okay, Supervisor Shervinsky.
Thank you. My phone wasn't responding at all, so a couple things. First of all, in one place, just as a note, we seem to have reference Resolution 29-23, and then in the agenda, we reference Resolution 30-23, so not quite sure what's going on there, but just thought I'd bring that up.
Renumbering happened when 29-23 was pulled. So
Okay.
29-23 got pulled, and that then moved 30-23 to 29-23.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to make sure that we had all our ducks in a row so that we didn't, have any issues that way. I would like to add my compliments. I mean, certainly the design process, the thought process, a lot of hard work has gone into this, and it's very evident. I mean, you're well prepared. The question I do have is, I believe Jessica and Craig, I think you both kind of in passing mentioned the difficulty with forensic pathologists in the state as well right now. My concern is, are we potentially building a facility, and are we actually going to be able to bring the right people in that we need to staff the facility, or are we going to have this wonderful facility and now we have no forensic pathologists, there to staff it?
So the number one thing is most of the offices that have forensic pathologists are large metropolitan cities. Typically, counties that have over 500,000 population, those are where they're state mandated to have a forensic pathologist. Marathon County is very unique, where we are a smaller county. We're a middle-sized county. We have enough caseload, enough things going on, but we're not a large metropolitan area. So the forensic pathologist that would want to come here is definitely not the same forensic pathologist who would want to live in Milwaukee or Dane County within Wisconsin. The great news is we have a wonderful working relationship with UW-Madison. Dr. Corliss has personally promised that he would help with any type of recruitment that we may have. He has a great reputation. He is a professor at the UW and also their chief forensic pathologist there. There are currently 2 forensic pathologists that want to stay within Wisconsin that would be ready for employment starting next year. One of them is actually from Wausau. She had reached out to me over the weekend and is very excited about our plans. There's another one from the Eau Claire area that I've been in contact with who is interested as well. There are some issues with family that he might not be willing or able to move up here, but he has expressed interest. There's also multiple forensic pathologists coming from UW because of their great partnership with the medical school, having these medical students seeing what forensic pathologists do. I know there's a shortage of forensic pathologists, but with us, the facility itself being a very unique partnership with all the teaching, that would be a huge draw. We have a great community. We have a wonderful reputation with our office. I really do think that we could get a pathologist, and a pathologist that would come would be happy to work with us.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions? Okay. Administrator Leonard, please.
Well, being the budget numbers guy for you, I do want to make one additional plug that, as Task Force Chair McEwen referenced in the financials, there's one change that we didn't update in those financials that I think is speaks to the very detailed work that the task force and staff have been doing on this. So currently, as Vice Chair McEwen referenced, there's a push at the state level for funding. And that is, there's a bill being proposed that provides that funding, but it also does one other really important thing. As was referenced at Public Safety previously and at the full board, Jess's office has fees that are set by statute, and they're in that document that we referenced before, that departmental fees. And there's currently a moratorium on the creation of a death record fee for Marathon County. In fact, we had a death record signing fee. The legislature created this law and backdated its moratorium to before we created it, but that's a different story. In any event, we've been working very closely with Wisconsin Counties Association. Chair Gibbs has been part of this work group along with the rest of us. And working with them, the bill proposal allows for an exception to that moratorium for this project to move forward, for us to institute that death record signing fee based on the transition from lay forensic science center services to professional or autopsy services within a building. And what that means is about $50,000 of annual revenue. So despite the financials that we had where we saw, and those are conservative financials. I mean, from my perspective, I mean, we try to be conservative in terms of the business we'd be taking in and our expenses. But nevertheless, there should be $50,000 of additional revenue coming in simply from that death record signing fee. So very complex scenario here. And I also want to make a couple of clarifications. The 3 to 6 employees, those are 3 to 6 additional employees. The entire business plan, as I'm sure you noted when you read through it, we looked at it as a business plan on top of status quo is the way to look at it. Jess's office, as are many offices in county government, not money-making endeavors. She currently is funded with tax levy. A portion of her fees are offset with, a portion of her budget is set offset with fees, but nevertheless, there's still tax levy funding. This business plan anticipates that funding level continuing, but you do see there's some revenue opportunities that were listed in that slide. But I just wanted to make sure those two clarifications. It was really a business plan on top of our current operations in the current funding levels, the additional employees as opposed to total employees, because Jess's office has already got more than 3 employees.
4.7 and 1 on call.
Yeah,
And 1
so-
cremation viewer.
So those were additional employees. So happy to answer any questions, but thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Chair.
Okay, any additional questions? Any additional questions by the board? All right, thank you. You answered everybody's question. Perfect. Great presentation. Moving on to item number 10, announcements and/or requests. Any announcements or requests? Okay, we're down to item number 11. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Robinson and second by Supervisor Wilhelm. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor to adjourn signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. We stand adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.